Yes. Okay?
Yes.
Yeah. So, the purpose of my practice is to be a pure container wherein the common passions mature as higher wisdom. So we'll have a look at that. Yeah. It's a section of the evening chanting. So, wisdom, you know, prajna. The word prajna plays a very, very important part in Buddhism. We talk about Buddhism as a wisdom religion, and you have like the paramitas. Prajna is the highest paramita, the pinnacle, you could say, of Buddhism, prajna. And we've chosen to translate it as wisdom, which is not a bad translation, but it doesn't have exactly this, doesn't map exactly, you know. Always when you translate a word from one language to another, there are slightly different associations, there's a different etymology, and so on. If you say in Western context you talk about wisdom, then probably people think of the wisdom of Solomon. Solomon in the Bible, who is reputed to have been supremely wise. And you might think of the story of Solomon deciding between two women who were quarrelling over a baby. They both said the baby was theirs. And how were they going to decide? Well, they didn't have genetic testing or anything like that in those days. So how are they going to decide which of these women, you see? And Solomon said, well, since we can't arrive at a solution, we'll cut the baby in half and you can have half each. And as he said it, he watched the faces of the women. And one was horrified and the other was not. And so he knew that the one who was horrified was the mother, and that the other one was the jealous one who didn't want that woman to have a baby. And so it was a trick, if you like, to find out. But what was he finding out? He was finding out what was deeper. He was finding out the sentiment behind the presentation. And this is very largely what prajna means. Prajna is cognate, we say, with diagnosis. Pra in Sanskrit is daya in Greek. Jnana in Sanskrit is gnosis in Greek. They are related languages, so you have some direct parallels, like that. So an etymological rendering of prajna into Greek and therefore into the rest of the European languages would be diagnosis. And diagnosis means to see beyond the symptoms, to see beneath the presenting appearance. Because the point here is that presenting appearances often lie. They are often deceptive. Presenting appearance, in Buddhism we call rupa. What is genuine, fundamental, real, that may be represented by the rupa or may be disguised and hidden by the rupa, is Dhamma. Dhamma is what is true. Rupa is just what appears to be true. Sometimes they are the same, and then we say it is congruent. Sometimes they are not the same. And much of the art of life, of wisdom, being wise, is being able to see through presenting appearance, to discern what is really there. Which of these women really loved the baby? Which of them had another motive? Jealousy, envy, spite, whatever. First appearance, they both present the same. It's my baby. But and also, of course, you can see from the Solomon example that the giveaway is in that spontaneous moment. When the person first hears they're going to cut the baby in half, what's the immediate response? The one who's full of spite is actually slightly gloating that the baby will be killed. Whereas the other one, it's my baby. Of course, give them a minute or two and they've both covered it up with a social presentation. But, and you can think of many, many situations like this where the giveaway is in that spontaneous moment when we're caught unawares. Something happens that we didn't expect. You suddenly find that somebody's stolen something from you, or you suddenly get some bad news, or we're all taught how to cover it up, and we do so quite quickly usually. We put on our mask very quickly, and then you can't tell. But in the spontaneous moment, there is the truth. Of course, we can apply this to ourselves as well. One aspect of meditation or awareness is to study our own immediate spontaneous reactions, because this tells us something about ourselves. And the more we feel under a kind of social pressure to present ourselves as respectable, as kind, or whatever it is that our society demands of us. In some societies we might be demanded to be tough and hard-hearted. That might be what society requires of us in a particular role. We will oblige. We will put on the mask, the persona, like the mask. We all do it. But what is genuine? This is what matters. What's really there? And to know oneself is to know those what comes up spontaneously, not what one has studied and learned to present. Like that. So prajna is to be able to see through presenting appearance, to see what is underneath. Of course, when one is in the role of a counsellor, therapist, or spiritual guide, or any kind of role of that kind, this is what one attempts to do. One attempts to see, yes, but what is really true? The seeker, the adept, the client tells a story. They present something. How much of it is really true? They might think it's true. They might have convinced themselves. But how much is really true? And how do you tell? Well, you tell in part by very acute observation. You see the little tensions, the little twitches in the face, the changes of direction in the way they present something. And from those tiny clues you get a sense of what's really true. Because often we don't actually know what's true. We don't know ourselves very well. We know how to navigate our social situation. We know how to find our way through amongst the people that we most of the time deal with, and we have a story for telling this one and a story for telling that one, and it works after a fashion, in that we survive and that all the right social things happen and so on. But this doesn't address what is deeper, you see. Now what is deeper, of course, is to do with our passions. So the phrase, the verse says, the common passions mature as higher wisdom. And the common passions are all the instinctive things that we feel, starting with hunger and thirst, and then all the more complicated, shame, guilt, desire, everything. Yeah. And so of course you can look at this list of human passions, and quite easily you can see it as a list of sins in some way. You see? And with all this stuff on brain science that's around these days, you know, we talk about, like nowadays, we talk about like the reptilian bit of our brain, you know, that something happens, and the bit of us that's quite closely related to the crocodile, you know, is snap. Before the more, we think, highly developed functions, you know, click in and start thinking about it, and of course they're what produce the presentation, because crocodile doesn't care about presentation. Yeah, he just cares about getting the fish into his mouth. This is the only thing that matters, really. So we have something of that in us, you see, and of course it operates faster. This is why the first flash response is often the giveaway, because that bit of the brain operates immediately, and the more complicated social presentation takes longer to put together. Not much longer, half a minute will do, but you know, takes longer, like that. So it's simplistic to think, oh well, what we have to do is get rid of those passions. You know, stop being greedy, stop being fierce, stop being envious, stop being jealous, stop being all those other things, and learn virtues, replace them with virtues, you see, like that. And of course this is a kind of simplistic view of religion. You know, a lot of people are brought up with this kind of idea of religion. Learn good from bad, and do one and get rid of the other. But Buddhism is not really like that, because I would say Buddhism is more sophisticated. It sees that the virtues and the passions are actually the same energy. They are the same thing. They are just a more mature version of the same thing. So what we are looking at is, we say, the passions. It's the passions that mature as wisdom. You see? And you can see the direct connection between wisdoms and passions, because if your view of something changes, your passion changes. If I see you as my arch enemy, then as soon as you walk in the room, some passion comes up. But if my view of you changes, and I suddenly discover actually you're not my enemy, you're my good friend, when you walk in the room, I have a different passion comes up. You see? The passion and the perception are intimately connected. You see? When the crocodile sees a fish, snap. You see? If it realized the fish wasn't a fish, it was something else, it would have a different reaction. Even so, even at that reptilian level, yeah, the passion depends on the perception. And change of perception, change of passion. So Buddhism is like that, you see. As we are, if you are enlightened, what is enlightenment? Enlightenment essentially is a change of perception. Where previously you saw threat and difficulty and things to criticize and so on. Now you see things to be appreciated, things to be, you see the richness of existence. It's a change of perception. The same things are there. You know, it's the same man who walks through the door. But you see him in a different light, we say. This is why I call it enlightenment, because the light changes. The halo, the colouring, the spin we talked about yesterday that you put upon it is different. And so the passion's different. But you can see that you really have almost no direct leverage on the passion itself. As you see, so will be the passion. You have a little bit of leverage on how you see things, but it's relatively limited. If I know he's my enemy, I'm going to take a lot of convincing that he's not. But of course something might come along that does persuade me. And what comes along might be information about the object, the person, or it might be something that changes me in some more global way, as when I run into an example of another person who doesn't see, you know, perhaps, I don't know, perhaps it's a black man and I'm accustomed to see all black men as my enemies. You see? And then I meet somebody else who doesn't see black people as their enemy, and this person gains my admiration, and we become friends, and well, some of his attitude will rub off on me, and maybe I'll say, oh, black people aren't so bad after all, you know. And I stop collecting, because like once we see black people as bad, we're busy collecting extra evidence to substantiate this for ourselves. You see, we go around looking for, oh, look, there's another instance of, you know, and of course, black people, white people, yellow people, whatever. There's always a range of evidence you can pick from, and if you're only looking for one sort, you'll find it. You see? If you want evidence that they're good people, you'll find it. If you want evidence that they're bad people, you'll find it. Like that. It becomes the perception, passion thing becomes a circle. It's not just starting afresh every time. Which is one of the reasons, of course, we talk in Buddhism about trying to cultivate this seeing things afresh, so that to break that cycle. But it's not easy to do, because once you're convinced of something, you go around looking. Not particularly consciously, because you believe that that is the case. You see? And so you're kind of unconsciously just soaking up everything that confirms that how you think things are is how they are. Even a lot of our trivial day-to-day conversation with other people is not an exchange of information. It's a way of sort of massaging our prejudices. It's a way of getting this person to confirm that what I think is true. Aren't those roses nice? Oh, yes. Like that, you see. And so we pick people who are going to say similar things to us, and yeah. And of course now it's on a big scale with the internet and so on. But and you only hear from people who agree with you after a while. And you only hear things that you already think. And so you get more and more into a tight world like that. Yes. So what's the alternative? You see, how can you be a pure container of these passions, so that they mature, so that they don't just form a vicious circle, they don't just remain tight, as it were. You know, they just grow in a natural way, and through the experience of reality, the experience of life, they mature into a different way of seeing things. You see, we grow up. I'll answer that question in a minute, but first I want to add in just this point about maturing and growing up. You see, a lot of our Western way of thinking rather idealizes the child state. Yeah? We tend to think it's the child who is innocent, who then gets progressively corrupted as they get older. Buddhism, as far as I can see, has rather the opposite view. We come into the world with our bundle of karma, and if we're fortunate, we manage to shed some of it. Yes. And this is the process of maturity. So Buddhism is not really looking for getting back to your inner child. Buddhism is looking for maturation, growing up, taking a more adult view of things, we could say. And you can see that the small child, I want. You know, I don't get. You know, this is how a small child is. It's quite natural, but that's how they are. And little by little they learn what we call deferred gratification, being social, and so on. And some of that is just superficial, that they learn to put on a mask, but some of it's much deeper. You know, they learn through the experience of life how to cope with suffering, how to cope with interpersonal things. They learn about love, they learn about all sorts of things. So Buddhism is about maturing. And maturing comes about through I think the phrase comes from C.G. Jung, a psychologist. He said, collision with reality. We go along, you know, in our little way, and every so often, bang, we come up against realities that just shatter our illusion, you know. And of course, as you grow up, there are some of these inevitably come along. So it's a subject we discussed the other day in one of our discussions. Is there's a sort of balance between how you need a certain amount of suffering in order to make any progress at all. That if you have a completely charmed life, you're born into luxury and nothing ever goes wrong. This may not be ideal. Or it may be, of course, that when something does come along that is the collision with reality, it makes a huge impact on you, shatters your whole life. And of course, this is what happened with Shakyamuni Buddha. He had, because he'd been born with one very difficult circumstance, which was the death of his mother. And so everybody compensated for this and gave him this cosseted upbringing. And then he discovers sickness, old age, death, and so on. And this completely shatters his illusion about life. And he goes, we call this the first going forth into the world. It's a kind of archetypal picture of what happens for everybody. But usually it happens in smaller doses more frequently, not one big wham when you're sort of, however old he was, 14 or something. So, maturity. Yes. I said I was going to answer a question. I've forgotten what it was. How to be a pure container. would say the way to be a pure container is to have faith. To be a pure container is to take refuge. Because you need something that's beyond your passion. Yes. You need something that will hold that passion. Life is a passion. Life is a bundle of passions. But you need a sort of basket to put them in. And the word Dhamma, probably in origin, etymology again, probably in origin means something like something that holds. And I think the image is rather like a mother holds a baby, like that. The Dhamma holds us. So the Dhamma enables us to mature because it holds us at those key points. When we have the collision with reality, yes, we don't go to pieces because we are held. And if you can meet the great difficulties of life without going to pieces, then at those points you mature. You learn something that you're never going to forget. You know, this may happen a number of times in the course of your life. Your parent dies, or the person you love leaves you, or whatever it is, you see. At that point, you have to face this reality. You don't want to, it's not what you wanted, it's not what you envisaged, you see. And of course, at those crucial points, the big sort of crossroads or points where the roads diverge, these are the points at which may be the making of somebody or the destroying of them. Yes, if the person has nothing to hold them at that point, they may be wrecked. They may go on for years and years afterwards, unable to get themselves back together again, we would say. And so their life becomes a mess. Disaster zone. One trouble leads to another. And they can't climb back up again. Another person has the same experience, or maybe even a worse experience. And they come through it as a more mature person. Able to cope with life better than before. And the work of therapy, the work of spiritual guidance, is often that of trying to make the difference between these two things. Yes. As it were, holding the person's hand. As a therapist, somebody comes to me, they're in the middle of a divorce. Well, I can't make their spouse come back. You see? I can't solve the problem in that sense, or they're grieving for somebody who's died. I can't bring the person back to life. But I can help them in a way that I hope will result in them emerging from this transition a stronger, more mature person, rather than a weakened, wounded victim person. Yes. Because I know it can go either way. And the difference is to do with faith. And the therapist in this situation is a sort of catalyst for faith. Because at the end of the day, it's the faith that's in the client, you might say, that matters. But how are they going to find that? You see? And one of the ways they find it is through the connection with somebody else who has it. It's a transmission. If I have faith in that situation, if I deeply empathize with them, so I deeply understand what they are going through, and it's evident to them that I am not defeated by it, then there's a good chance they won't be defeated by it either. They will find the faith to go through it. Yes. Even though it's destroyed all the resources that they thought they'd got before. They thought everything was hunky-dory and they got life all sorted out, and suddenly the hammer of fate comes down and smashes their illusion. And what do? what they tend to do at that point is to regress, lose a lot of what seemed to be the maturity that they'd already got. So then they come and see somebody. They come and see a guide of some kind. It's important that at that point that the guide has that kind of solidity, has some bottom, you could say. You know, it's like the Daruma doll. You know, in Japan they're called Daruma dolls, but we have toys of the same kind in the West, where you have an inflatable about this size and it has a weight in the bottom, so the kid can knock it over and it comes back up again. It may rock about a bit, but it always finishes up like this, you see. And that's what you're looking for. It's something that has some bottom, some weight in the bottom. So it always returns. And what enables you to do that? Faith. You see? Faith of some kind. And faith that transcends circumstance. Everybody has some sort of faith, but mostly people put their faith in some sort of circumstance. When I have the right house, when I have the right spouse, when I have enough money, but none of these things are reliable. They are refuges of a kind, but they are impermanent. This is the whole point about refuge in Buddhism, is everybody takes refuge in something, but you need a refuge that's not impermanent, not inherently infected with dukkha, like money is, for instance. You need a refuge that, in a sense, is transcendent, that goes beyond the ordinary material, practical world. It will stand you in good stead wherever you are, whatever happens. And you can see that, for instance, the studies that were done on who survived in concentration camps. The people who survived in concentration camps were mostly people who had faith. It didn't seem to matter which faith they had. They might be Jehovah's Witnesses, they might be Mormons, they might be Muslims, but they survived. The people who had no faith died. Yeah? They didn't have that container like that. And so the purpose of my practice is to be a pure container, to be a container for life. Life goes on. And the way to be a container is faith. We say container, you could say a receptor. You know, a basket is like this. You can imagine like a dish that receives the radiation from distant planet or whatever. Bit like that. But one way or another, one needs to have that kind of underpinning, the grace in one's life, which will carry you through difficult circumstances, that will carry you through the Nazis coming to power and sticking you in a concentration camp. Because some people in those camps were not only survived, but were an inspiration to others. Where most people crumbled and died very quickly, like that. So giving these sorts of examples, which are not particularly Buddhist, it shows that what we're talking about here, and this is true of Buddhism generally, are general principles. They're principles of life. The Buddha does not recruit us into something that's a bit weird and different. The Buddha points out the reality that is the reality for everybody. We wrap it up in a certain terminology. We talk about Amida, we talk about Nembutsu, we talk about Buddha, Dhamma and Sangha and so on. But the underlying principles of all this, universal. Sometimes say, in these interfaith discussions, people say, is Buddha a god? And I say, well, it doesn't matter if Buddha's a god, but it does matter if your god's a Buddha. Because, this is the fundamental principle, the Buddhaliness, wisdom, compassion, kindness, and so on. Universal, everybody recognizes this. This is a special property of Buddhism. It's just that that's the word that we give for it. And if you put that at the center of your life, if your God is those things, then you receive that grace. That gives you that strength. Gives you that strength that carries you through the dukkha of life, the hardness, the obstacles, the difficulties. And that, of course, turns the dukkha into celestial flowers. Instead of it being something that destroys you, it's something that makes you. Yeah? Which doesn't mean that it suddenly becomes nice. Yeah? I remember hearing a rabbi give a wonderful sermon. And he talked about, really he was talking about the good work he'd done in his life. And he'd done a lot. And he said, I would never have done all this if my son hadn't died. And he said, and if you ask me, would I give up all this to have my son back? I would say yes. But I have to say that, I did all this because of the change that came over me when my son died. And this is the great bittersweetness of life. That turning Mara's host into celestial flowers does not mean that they become nice. But it does mean that you see the richness and not just the horror. Yes. That there is a transformation is possible. Spiritual transformation is possible. And it's only possible when you have this kind of alchemy that comes from having what we call the Buddha, the Dharma in your life, the grace, the faith. Yeah, and that is there. It helps you through. And each time that happens, it lifts you a little further in your maturity. Yes. Now also you can see, just as we have very little control over the passions in their raw state, the transformation of the passions happens very largely automatically. Yes, if I start seeing the person as friend instead of enemy, automatically I feel differently. Yeah? So we can say, in a sense, this maturation goes on unconsciously. Very largely, it's not a matter of training ourselves to be. The training we do is to put on a front. Yeah? The real thing goes on at another level. Use rather un-Buddhist language, you could say the soul is busy growing in its own way without telling us about it. It does it secretly. But what you can do is you can feed it. You can create the conditions. Yeah? And you can, one of the best ways of feeding it is to associate with people who already have that kind of faith. When the Buddha is asked what to do, he often starts by saying, well, keep good company. If you're in the company of people who have that kind of faith, who have that kind of instinct, who have that kind of maturity, it will rub off on you. The thing that I feel most grateful for, or extremely grateful for, is that I've been able at various times in my life to associate with some very good teachers. That's all I do really is thank you. This is in that sense I just transmitter like that. Some of these contacts very brief, some over many years. but that's a big factor. So these two things, inspiration and meeting adversity, are the two big contributors to the maturing process. Having a good example and coping with obstacle. These are the things that mature people, and I think you can see many examples of this. And it's particularly when the two come together. You see this with in Buddhism, the 4 sights. 3 of the sights are obstacle, and the 4th sight is inspiration. And these things when these things happen together, this is the optimum conditions for maturation, for growth, like that. And of course, we have some. It is very largely you can't choose to run into accidents. It's a sort of, I will plan an accident as a sort of contradiction of terms. But you can do something about planning good company. You know, not entirely. You're not under control of it completely by any means, but you can do a certain amount. And this is why we say in Buddhism, take refuge in Sangha as well as take refuge in Buddha and Dhamma. Yes. So, yes. Common passions mature as higher wisdom. And the purpose of my practice is to be a pure container. Yes, I think I've covered the ground. Namo Amida.